The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Hi, my name is Sonya Peral. I'm from Nine Pin Cider Works in Albany, New York, and we're here today as part of our series called New York Cider, and the purpose is to educate our viewers about New York cider and New York apples. We're very excited this afternoon to have Jenn Smith with us. Jenn is the Executive Director of the New York Cider Association. And she is going to educate us about the origins of the association, what it does, and its future. Hi, Jenn.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. So why don't you start on what is the New York Cider Association?
Sure. The New York Cider Association is a trade organization that's missioned around supporting individual producers and the cider industry at large in their roles as participating in the sort of economic engines of agriculture, tourism, manufacturing in the state. We're also involved in helping develop a market for cider and developing an identity for New York cider as being of quality and distinction, and supporting regional alliances throughout the state that are working on behalf of cider makers and apple growers.
Now, I've heard that New York produces world-class cider.
Unquestionably. New York is, has about 70 cider producers that are operating today. We have more cider producers in New York State than anywhere else in the country, so we're a leader on that front. And we see that there is a very diverse range of styles and a deep utilization of apples of uncommon character. So I'm thinking here about apples that are heirloom or high tannin, in addition to the kind of dessert fruit apples that are used in other parts of the country. So, we have ciders that are being produced with a kind of wine-like style. We have ciders that are being produced more akin to craft beer flavors, really a broad range.
And so who belongs to the New York Cider Association?
Yeah, so our primary members are cider producers and cider apple growers. But additionally, there are enthusiast members, there are members who work in distribution, and there are members in allied industries that are supportive of the growth of cider in the state. We have we have a member who produces trade events. We have a couple of members that provide legal representation to craft beverage producers, and we're hoping to expand that kind of allied membership in the coming years.
And how did the association get started?
Yeah, so a little get in your Wayback Machine. Cider Week has been produced. We're entering our 7th year of the Cider Week's cycle. And Cider Week
Let's backtrack, though. Cider Week is different from the association,
yes,
correct? Okay.
Yeah. So Cider Week was an idea that was launched by Glenwood, which is a sustainable agriculture not-for-profit based in the Hudson Valley and missioned around ensuring that the Hudson Valley remains a region defined by farms and farm-based foods. They brought a number of cider makers, primarily from the Hudson Valley, together to into New York City for a trade event that sort of became Cider Week, which is a festival where individual bars, restaurants, bottle shops stage events and offer cider-centric menu offerings. The first year was focused on a trade event, and in subsequent years, more consumer-facing events occurred. With the energy and the momentum of Cider Week and the opportunity for cider makers from throughout the state to come together during Cider Week and at other Glenwood-led sort of convenings, it was determined that there was a need for a more explicit organization, a more explicit alliance of cider makers. And this need was developing at the same time that New York State was really providing additional resources for the craft beverage industry at large. So there was, interest from the state and funding available, and a need that had been determined by Glenwood and the community of cider makers that had participated in Cider Week for a trade organization to come together. The energy around this really started coalescing in 2014. The Cider Association was chartered and received its not-for-profit status in the summer of 2015, but it wasn't really until the winter of 2016 when there was liftoff for the association. And we had our first general meeting. It was held in Walden, New York at Angry Orchard's Innovation Lab and Facility, which is set on a beautiful, I think it's 100-plus-year-old orchard. So in February of 2016, we convened. We had more than 50 cider makers. There were 80 guests in all. A really inspiring group of speakers from our partners in Department of Ag and Markets and the State Liquor Authority, as well as experts in the industry. We had a really dynamic speaker on the use of yeast in cider making. So that was sort of the debut of the association. And in 2016, the association took over the production of Cider Week. So there are now 3 Cider Week festivals in New York State. There's Cider Week Hudson Valley. This year, the dates for that are June 9th through 18th. There's Cider Week Finger Lakes, which is out focally in Ithaca and then throughout that region, September 29th to October 8th. And finally, Cider Week New York City, which was the first Cider Week, and that this year is going to be October 20th to 29th. So the New York Cider Association produces those collective marketing events. Additionally, we had our second general meeting just about 6 weeks ago. This one was out in the western part of the state, which is a market that we see developing and an area where we see a lot of energy from producers. We're even considering launching a Cider Week Western New York in 2018. The second meeting was every bit as successful as the first. Really high level of engagement from producers. I'm very proud to say that we have about 60 of the 70 cider makers in the state on board as members. I think that that's significant in that it shows a deep penetration of the association into the community and a great deal of trust and interest in the work we're doing. And that work is, as noted, it's developing the market, but it's also providing advocacy and education both for producers and for the consumer and trade markets.
So if our viewers are interested in participating in Cider Week, where can they go to learn more about it?
Yeah, so As I said, Cider Week Hudson Valley is coming up quite soon, in the middle part of June, and the best place to go for that would be the Cider Week Hudson Valley website, which is ciderweekhv.com. There's similar sites for Cider Week FLX and Cider Week NYC. We also have a Cider Association Facebook page that's going to list some high-level events that are going on, and we're looking to debut our redesigned website, really launching our website. We've had sort of a placeholder where I've been able to communicate essential information to members, but it hasn't had much of a consumer-facing skin on it. We should be launching that in late April, early May, and that will have a robust interface for people to find producers, to encourage visitation to cideries. Additionally, it will have a calendar of events, and the big vision is that members, cider maker members, will be able to post their own events there, as well as the events that the association is producing, so that it'll be a good calendar of what's going on throughout the state.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about craft beverage support in New York State?
Yeah, we've been very lucky that this sort of bubbled up to the surface as an issue that Governor Cuomo wanted to give some attention to. So by eliminating a lot of the red tape around the license application process, by minimizing tax burdens, as well as other financial burdens associated with brand label registration and identifying small producer statuses, by diversifying the kind of production licenses that are out there, so that producers who are using 100% New York State fruit are able to be classed as farm cideries. And then by providing a fund of money available for producers and associations and allied organizations to stage marketing and tourism events that help create familiarity with the craft beverage industry. We've been very lucky on all of those counts. The combined result of that is we've seen growth. The farm cidery license was created in, it was October 2014, yeah?
That Cuomo signed.
Yeah.
No, it was 2013. He signed the legislation. It became effective in January.
Right. So
2014.
we use 2014 as the sort of year zero. There were 8 farm cideries that had initially registered in that first year, and now there are 24 of them. Overall, wow. Overall the industry's grown by about 250% in New York State in that time period. And we're seeing, increases in volume and sales that correlate to that growth in licenses. So it's a sustainable growth as well. We're not seeing a bubble of cider makers. So it's been well timed as the national market for cider develops as well, right? The interest. There are a number of factors that contribute to the growth of cider nationally. Naturally, it's a national growth. There's a quest for authenticity and farm-based products, particularly within the millennial consumer market. There's also the rise of gluten-free as a lifestyle and diet choice, which, whatever you may think of it, is very real. It's a very real segment of the food and beverage market, and cider being made from apples is naturally gluten-free. There's an interest in craft across the board in food and beverage, and alcohol beverage is no different, and so craft ciders have benefited from that energy. So the national market's growing. We have a very pro-business and pro-ag climate here in New York, thanks to Governor Cuomo's focus on the industry. And, we were well situated in that we're naturally an orchard region, right? We have historically been a huge apple producer, second largest apple producer in the country. So we had the base product here already, and we also had proximity to the Northeast, where some of the sort of original cider maker pioneers in the United States, who have been working since the 80s, 90s, folks like Farnham Hill and West County, to develop a quality cider made in both of those cases, what I would describe as an old world style.
Just let me get a clarification there. You're not talking about the pioneers of the American, the colonial
expansion.
those pioneers. You're talking about the 1980s.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. I just want our viewers to make sure our viewers are understanding.
Sure. Yeah.
This is the word.
Yeah. The history of cider making in the United States. It was something that was kind of a farm. It was a farm-based beverage, but it was generally not market based, right? So there wasn't a tremendous amount of surplus made by any individual producer. You made what you consumed, or you bartered with your neighbors. It wasn't a commodity. And yes, Prohibition had something to do with the demise of that, but really more than Prohibition, it was urbanization, right? So farmland being utilized for housing, increasingly in the 20th century, led to the demise of a lot of orchards, and so less cider being made. So cider was in dormancy for quite some time. And in the late 80s, 90s, we see a couple of cider making pioneers, craft beverage pioneers in New England, bringing ciders to market that had the style and influence from regions like England, Normandy. You didn't see much of the Spanish influence, but that is another one of those old world regions that had continued to produce cider,
without interruption. Part of their culture.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh. So let's talk a little bit about what you see for the future of the New York State Cider Association.
Yeah. We have built capacity around the organization, so we have process and workflow and communications. We have a very active board of directors. It's 9 members. They come from all over the state. Most are both growers and cider producers. We also have someone from Glenwood on our board. They continue to be very heavily involved in the development of the industry and the association. There's committee work that's coming out of this board of directors. So we have a research and education committee focusing this year on trying to come up with a definition of one of the primary characteristics of cider, which is its relative sweetness or dryness. We see that the term dry is misunderstood and often deliberately misused in the kind of macro cider market. So ciders that have quite a bit of back sweetening in them are labeled as dry. And when you have a consumer who's new to your product and they're told that something's dry and they get a mouthful of Jolly Rancher, it creates confusion. We hope that by coming up with a collectively agreeable way of defining dryness based on measurable scientific characteristics,
Like a dryness scale?
like a dryness scale, if you will, that has different characteristics that it's reflecting. We're thinking residual sugar, so the actual sweetness, total acidity, which is mouth-feel sensation, and also phenolic content, the tannin, so that grippiness that you get with red wine. The interplay of those three factors, or if there's not tannin present, which oftentimes there isn't tannin present in cider if it's being made from more traditionally, culinary dessert fruit, the interplay between the acid and the sugar, where you fall on the scale between dry and sweet. If we can come up with a consistent way of measuring and then referring to sweetness, we can educate people around those characteristics and help create an identifiable an identifiable mode of communication.
Standard that everybody understands what terms mean.
And so a consumer walking into a store and finding a cider that's unfamiliar can turn it around to the back and see, is this in the range of sweetness or dryness that I'm seeking right now, and really get an idea of what they're going to taste when they put it in the glass.
So that's your research committee.
That's the research committee. I mean, the early part is what are the characteristics we're using. It'll shift over to the marketing committee, which is marketing and communications is another one of our committees. And once we've determined what the criteria are and how the scale would be manifest, there is the question of, well, how do we communicate this? Are we going to build a campaign around this? How do we popularize this idea and get it into the consumer consciousness? The marketing committee will take that on. In addition to that project, if we get along with that this year, we'll be producing, the marketing committee is the group that produces the Cider Week festivals, we'll begin doing research on Western New York Cider Week for 2018. We also have a legislative committee, and there are some opportunities, some market expansion opportunities that touch on online sales and shipping that the legislative committee will be engaged with this year. We'll probably be putting some energy behind clarifying our agenda over the summer, and then taking it to coming back here to Albany and taking it to the folks on the Ag Committee and in the governor's office to talk about what we can accomplish this fall. Those are the high-level projects for us for this year. Yeah.
That's very exciting. How do people join? Is it the committees, are they made up of the board, or are they made up of the membership? How does that work?
Yeah, we welcome participation on the committees from everyone, regardless of your membership level. You can be a cidery in planning, you can be just an enthusiast. Certainly, we've found it to be really productive. Our marketing committee consists of a couple of members from trade, a distributor, as well as a few cider makers. And so that kind of cohesive cross-section of people that are interested in the industry, I think, is a real benefit to a committee. So, first become a member, which you can do by visiting the website, NewYorkCiderAssociation.com. And then once you've joined, you can get in touch with me, you can get in touch with the committees directly. I regularly send out communications that encourage people to be a part of committees, kind of teasing what they're working on, and inviting people to join in. I think it's, a great way to help steer the stately ship that is New York Cider. People should feel welcome to get involved.
But they need to become members to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And so now, really, it's all about enjoying the cider.
Yes.
And is the association involved in any consumer type promotion of cider so that our viewers get to try different ciders, et cetera?
Yeah. Specifically coming up quite soon for any visitors that can make their way to New York City, we're going to have a good showing of cider makers at the Taste New York Craft Beverage Experience, which is down in Battery City at Pier A, which is a really beautiful venue. That's a one-day event that's been put together by Taste New York, which is kind of the state's agency for focusing on New York State-made food and beverage. So we will have some food there, but additionally there'll be a real good turnout of craft beer, spirits, premium wine, and craft cider as well. Additionally, we have the Cider Week festivals, and those generally involve somewhere, in the Hudson Valley, we see 40, 50 different bars and restaurants and shops participate. In the Finger Lakes, it's a little bit higher than that, 60, 70, and down in New York City, we have about 100 different venues that participate. The great thing is that over the years of planning and producing Cider Week, we've developed relationships with these locations and helped educate their teams to the point that it doesn't have to be Cider Week to enjoy some of the fine ciders that our state produces in those venues. So looking at those Cider Week websites and checking out the cider spots, the locations that are participating even from last year, or even if Cider Week isn't until late September in the Finger Lakes, you're going to get a good idea of who is supportive of the cider community and is likely to be featuring New York State ciders in their establishment.
So during Cider Week, they would add offerings to their menu.
Yeah.
Are there any dinners where that are special dinners at restaurants that are paired with certain ciders? Or
Right.
How does that work?
Right. We're just beginning to recruit locations for Hudson Valley at present. Of course, we have relationships with them, so it's the recruitment's pretty easy. But this year, we're asking all of the locations that are participating to really show some commitment and bring cider to life for their customers by adding a specific, cider to perhaps a menu header, or a specific cider cocktail to their drinks list, or a cheese and cider pairing. And then above and beyond that, there are often during Cider Week specific cider maker dinners at establishments. So, the cider maker will work with the chef to plan out a special menu and pair carefully whatever they're producing.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So our viewers can check out the Cider Association website for the Hudson Valley
Yep. Yeah, we'll have
week,
links
which
there.
is coming up in June.
Yep.
That's great. Jenn, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you this afternoon and to learn more about the New York Cider Association.
Pleasure's
Thank you
been
so
mine.
much for coming in.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you around. Thank you.
Thanks.